Frank King is the Director of RNG Business Development for UGI Energy Services. He's responsible for sourcing, identifying, and delivering opportunities that create and enhance the profitability of UGI Energy Services RNG business, as well as to conduct activities that will potentially grow the business into new geographies and product lines. Prior to joining UGI in 2020, Frank spent 15 years working in various management roles for Williams and EQT, serving most recently as the Manager of Commercial Development for Williams Ohio River Supply Hub. He earned an undergraduate degree in accounting from the University of Pittsburgh and an MBA from the John F. Donahue Graduate School of Business at Duquesne. So please join me in welcoming Frank. Good to see you, man.
Should I hold this or put this in?
Yeah, you have the lapel too, so it's recorded, but.
So you want both?
Yeah. Yeah, both would be good, if you can.
So I got to manage this, a clicker, and a water bottle. Okay. Well, thanks for having me today, everyone. Wanted to talk to you about, kind of looked at the agenda ahead of this and seemed to be a good net zero ESG theme to the agenda. So that's what my focus will be today. But when Drew reached out to me, it was kind of, well, can you talk to us about UGI? We see you in the headlines. You've been making acquisitions in the area. So give you a brief introduction as to who UGI is, what we're doing on the midstream front, and then how we're pivoting to our net zero future here. So more on UGI Corporation. Really, the business it's a holding company that has on one side of the business natural gas assets, on the other propane LPG assets. So make sure we're looking at this the right way. So this is backwards up there. So on the right-hand side, we have UGI Utilities, and that's our natural gas side of the business. So we have regulated gas and electric assets that serve roughly 900,000 customers. We own the largest utility in West Virginia via our Mountaineer gas acquisition that closed last year. And we're the second largest gas utility in Pennsylvania. All of those service territories lie, in and around the Marcellus Shale. Moving below that, we have UGI Energy Services, which is where I reside. We have midstream and storage assets, which we'll dive into a little bit more there. We run a large commodity marketing book throughout the East Coast, as well as we offer LNG, peak shaving, and power marketing. Moving on to the left side of this slide, what's interesting as I started working at UGI is a lot of folks don't realize that UGI, that UGI Corporation, that holding company, actually owns AmeriGas. So AmeriGas, obviously, they're the largest LPG distributor in the U.S. We have a lot of bulk distribution locations, as well as we run the cylinder exchange program. So a lot of what you see at Home Depot and Wawa and Sheetz when you're switching out your propane, that's all AmeriGas and UGI. And then also what's interesting is, we run a pretty large international business that's in 17 countries throughout Europe, serving roughly 500,000 customers. And that's primarily LPG distribution, and we run an energy marketing book there as well. So moving on to, since this is a midstream conference, wanted to talk about who UGI Energy Services is on the midstream front. So, legacy assets on this map are all of the blue assets. So they're primarily in central and northeastern PA. Some of these were, organically created opportunities, as well as all of our power generating assets reside there. Within the last 3 years, we've really had a push to grow into the Western Marcellus, just because it's very prolific rock on this side of the play. So we made our first step into the Western Marcellus with our acquisition of Columbia Midstream. And since then, we've spent some time the last few years trying to bolt on strategic acquisitions into that area. So, beyond just providing the true, midstream services, we try to cover the whole midstream value chain. So we can do anything from commodity marketing, we can provide LNG peak shaving to our utility as well as into the New England market area. We handle anyone's pipeline and storage capacity needs, and then we run a large gathering and processing system throughout the western part of the play. So in terms of the last few years, just what we've been focused on in growing our Appalachian footprint, we've done 2 acquisitions, both primarily in Butler County. The first of which was Pine Run Midstream. In February of 21, we acquired a 49% interest in Pine Run Midstream. So it gave us a lot of exposure to Penn Energy and some of the good dry gas acreage that exists, north of Pittsburgh, I would say. And so that system has a lot of capacity, very good acreage that supports expansions there. And then this year, we did the Stonehenge Appalachia acquisition. So we acquired, within the last 2 years, roughly 100 miles of pipe, add-on compression, another 600,000 a day of capacity. What's key here is, both of these systems were adjacent to our Big Pine system. And our Big Pine system, operationally, it's pretty full every day. So we wanted to position ourselves next to the assets that are gonna enable an expansion there for us. That if there's organic growth opportunities in the future, that we were well positioned for that. So the Stonehenge acquisition we completed this year. That's a rich gas gathering system. The gas from that system and the NGLs, they go to a third-party operator, and then a portion of that residue gas comes to us via our Big Pine system, which we acquired through the Columbia acquisition. So that's who we are, kind of more globally, and then drilling down into, the local market area. And then, the focus of what I'd talk to you about today is, we're pivoting more towards, a decarbonized, sustainable supply. And we have a large ESG focus as a company. And so really, one of the things here that we focus on is, this MSCI index is kind of the ESG index that we use to compare ourselves against our peer group. So we worked very hard over the last few years, and we've positioned ourselves to where now we're within the top quartile. But, we like to say that, well, we've penetrated the top quartile pretty well. We're at 18% relative to our peers, and we feel that, as the energy transition is occurring over time, that we're well positioned. So, that all starts with accountability to ourselves on our ESG focus, and I saw a lot of the agenda where, we'll see later, but there's really what that comes down to is get the right KPIs in place, collect all of the data that you can, and then focus on real-time emissions tracking and holding yourself accountable. So moving forward beyond, just those direct, what I would call tier 1 emissions, really we looked at the core of what we do, we're a large, diversified, energy portfolio and distributor. So we needed to advance forward into products that were also decarbonized and that offered a different set of environmental attributes towards our ESG goals. So we've been spending a lot of our time and are focused on the renewables front. And so what that means to us is we've been focused on renewable natural gas projects and developing those projects, as well as bio-LPG and RDME, or renewable dimethyl ether. The LPG and the RDME can be used in the propane side of the business, and then the RNG it's a logical bolt-on to our natural gas assets. So On the left-hand side up here, I really like this graph because people think about, what is really an RNG project. So, at the core of it really is, you have an anaerobic digester. So you're going to take a feedstock, which in this graphic from the RNG Coalition, that feedstock happens to be manure. So you put that manure into the front end of a digester, and out of the back end of it, you get biogas, which is roughly 40 to 60% methane. You have to upgrade that, you have to purify it, but then at that point, you've now created a renewable natural gas source that you can then put into your local distribution systems. You can then put into long-haul transmission systems. And then ultimately, a lot of this is consumed in the CNG and the transportation sector. One thing that's missing from this graphic, though, is another part of what comes out of the back end of these dairy products, or these dairy projects, is you have digestate that comes out of the back end, which goes back to the farmer, which helps them run their farm. So RNG, it's interchangeable with geological natural gas. It just comes from a different source. And, that biogas that's produced, it comes from a breakdown of organic matter over time. So the common sources for what goes into a lot of these projects are, you have landfill gas, you have agricultural manure, which we just touched on, you have food waste digesters, which rely on, spoiled beer, spoiled food waste that's been diverted from, food waste that's been diverted away from landfills. Some of that's, emerging, what I would say, in the political environment, just in terms of trying to get food out of landfills. You start to see it we're seeing it more on the coasts, where it's starting to be mandated throughout New England and in California. Those are what lead to these food waste digesters and then wastewater treatment facilities. The landfill gas, that's primarily, that's like a vacuum. So you have a well field for the landfills, and then you're vacuuming the gas out of it and then purifying it and upgrading it. The manure, the food waste, and the wastewater, those are digesters to create the biogas. So moving on to, what we view as our growth engine for the future, we're still at the core of what we do is natural gas and LPG, but we are going to put products into the mix of our portfolio that enable us to grow towards our, net zero future. So RNG, this slide is to demonstrate the carbon intensity of, fossil crude oil or fossil natural gas. They have a carbon intensity that is positive of roughly, 80 for natural gas and 100 for a crude oil product. The landfill RNG, which is a lot of what's being consumed for transportation today, that's called, a 40 or 50 carbon intensity. So that lowers you down to the next tier. But really, it's these dairy farm projects that a lot of folks are developing that help you get to your net zero future. Just given that the carbon intensity is so low there, you have a lot of fugitive emissions for those type of projects that are just naturally going into the atmosphere. And so by building these projects, you're keeping those out of the atmosphere. So we feel that renewable natural gas, it is the decarbonized and sustainable fuel source of the future. It's something that farmers have been doing every day. They've been figuring out a way to use their manure to generate electricity. You can do the same thing with the RNG from these projects. You can use it for heating, you can use it for electrical generation, and you can even use it for transportation. So, when that end user makes that choice to consume RNG, what they're doing is they're promoting, hey, let's capture these fugitive emissions because it's the right thing to do. But when they're replacing that fossil gas with this renewable resource, what they're also doing is when they combust it, there's lower greenhouse gases that are emitted to the atmosphere. So moving forward just into some of the work we've been doing at UGI, we've been focused on really developing a broad renewables footprint. And when I say a broad renewables footprint, just keep in mind, I keep dividing all of these slides into, here's LPG, here's natural gas. So on the bio-LPG side of the business, we've entered into the joint ventures for RDME as well as for bio-LPG. And then on the RNG side of the equation, we're developing 3 different farm projects in the state of New York, some of which will come on later this year. We're also developing a project in Idaho that's getting ready to go COD, hopefully in the next month. And then, we have a project in South Dakota for dairy as well. And, just outside of Cincinnati, we're developing a food digester as well. And, our first step into, what I would call the RNG space, we realized that we had to figure out a way to get market access to be able to market some of the RNG and some of the environmental attributes created from the RNG. So we acquired, an RNG marketing book in July of 2020, which was UGI Energy. And really what that did is that established us in California as a fuel distributor. And then that became the launching pad for all of our dairy projects, where we became the exclusive off-taker of all of the renewable natural gas and environmental attributes generated from those projects. So, we've done a lot of other collaborations within the past few years. We've worked with Archaea in Northeast PA to establish the largest interconnect with an RNG producer. That's going directly into our utility system. We've worked with a firm out of Australia called RNG Development Limited, where that was a unique project just because we're taking RNG from a project we're not developing, but we're putting it into our pennant gathering system, which we acquired through Columbia. And so we're putting it into our pipeline market and helping get it to end users there as well. We've also worked on a few large-scale offtake arrangements in Europe, one with EcoBenz. And then we're also working on a renewable bio-LPG project in California with Global Clean Energy. So, we'll continue to be busy and we'll continue to be active in this space because we think it's the right thing to do. We think it aligns well with the business we have today. And so with that, I'll take questions and appreciate the time today.
So are you building the digesters on existing farms, or are you trucking the waste product to your facility that's off-site?
The majority are built on the farms.
And so is there a minimum production weight and tonnage that needs to be produced in order for that to be viable?
Well, we think in terms of, and this is just our viewpoint, but we think in terms of how many head of cow do you need, not the tonnage per se. So how many head of cow do you need to make a project to be economically viable?
And that number is there a ballpark number where you're in the cost-benefit ratio?
Yeah, I would say, it gets pretty challenged once you start looking at, any projects less than 2,500 head of cow.
Does the farmer just kind of operate, or do you have people on site, or?
Yeah, so you either have the farmer operate it or you enter into an operating agreement. Typically you're leaning on the farmer to help you with that. Yes, sir?
My question was similar. Do you invest in the equipment at that farm site? Like you're more than just the off-taker, you're the owner of the...
Yes, yes.
distribution local, or do you do you need to compress the gas for higher pressure distribution?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, like, you know, as you're evaluating a project, typically we look for it to go into the low pressure distribution systems because, you know, the higher pressure ones, you're going to add compression, you're going to add cost.
So you're looking at RNG to primarily bring your carbon intensity score down, or do you actually sell RNG to others who want to offset emissions? And if so, what's the rough, I don't know, per MMBTU price range of RNG as compared to gas?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question, but I would say that depending on the type of RNG you're producing, excuse me, at current market conditions, you could probably sell it for $18 per MMBTU to, you know, almost 40. So that, you know, depends on the type of what they call RIN that you generate, as well as the carbon intensity of the RNG.
Are these skid packages or are these permanent structures at site
For
the dairy projects?
the dairy projects, I do not believe that they're skid. No, I mean, you're building a digester, right? So you're pouring the foundation and you're sequestering and you're mixing all of the manure and the waste.
Look at me.
Yes.
So two comparable projects we finished last year. One was Stonehenge at Picker Farm, we had the 3616. The other project was out by the airport, which is Republic's landfill. So Republic's landfill, you compare the two, each compression thousands of times higher for at Stonehenge UGI. Fortunately for the landfill, Amazon built their 500,000 square foot warehouse right across the other side, right? So they want all that gas and they're able to charge 5 to 6 amount as normal prices, which I was amazed. But comparable, if you
Sorry.
UGI's whole portfolio, what percentage are true RNG?
I can't answer that question. Just because, so we produce RNG, but we're not a producer of natural gas, but we run a large commodity marketing book. So to talk about the percentage of what's actually distributed, it's hard for me to assess that. But I could, you know, if you wanted to reach out to me, I could get back to you.
So are you owning and operating all those digesters and everything, or are you turning it over to someone else?
Yeah, I mean, we have development partners in a lot of the areas, but our preference is to own the majority of the project and the equity in those projects.
How much area of one of the farms do you need for the digester? Any idea?
I do not have any idea. I got to ask one of our engineers.